I'm here today with Professor Jackson. And could you please provide an overview of your area of research and teaching expertise?
Okay, great. So my research is in an area called ambidexterity, organizational ambidexterity. And what that is that in many organizations they face this challenge of how to kind of control and develop employee or individual competencies while also allowing for new innovations. And that's specifically a major problem for many competitive organizations, because if they kind of get locked into one mindset, they're more focused on controlling the organization at the expense of flexibility, or if they're overly focused on flexibility, then they kind of lose the standardization and consistency. So that's my area of research. And then in terms of the teaching, I kind of try to look at, well, how do we address that problem and try to build and also manage for effective organizations.
Great. What are the key qualities, skills, and practices needed in your area, and why would employers value them?
Okay, great. So related to that point, one of the major challenges, especially that we see with ambidexterity in the workplace, is that it really requires a person who's like kind of like a Renaissance person. You know, somebody who is creative, flexible, and resourceful and entrepreneurial. At the same time, do they know how to control? Do they know how to standardize? Do they know how to manage? Do they know how to deal with resources? So in the workplace, that's becoming more and more of a challenge, because most people are either you kind of situate on one hand, so to speak, or the other hand, but not really on both. So those are kind of the essential qualities of good leadership in terms of being able to balance both of those perspectives, but also being mindful and being able to integrate across those paradigms.
And how would it relate to good leadership?
Well, I think that good leadership is being a very good visionary, not only for your organization, but also looking now at the broader impact of that organization and what it does for society. And so, as part of being a visionary, you have to kind of look beyond dichotomies. You know, like I think in the past, many people said, well, this is good versus this is bad. And not really looking at the role of the context and how it's contingent. And so I think being a good leader recognizes the fact that it's not just all about flexibility or creativity. It's not just all about standardization and control, but it's really how we bring those functions together.
Right. What are some challenges and opportunities have you personally experienced in developing these real-world qualities and skills in the classroom?
Okay, so I think a major challenge that we see specifically in business education, management education more generally, is that there's this disconnect between theory and practice. You know, that oftentimes to build those skills, you really need real-world application. You really need to get people out there and actually doing it. And the reason that that's a challenge is because oftentimes what we do in many classrooms is more textbook-based learning or case study simulations, and that you know, even though the textbook may be great or case study simulations may be good, they can't really replace the real-world experience. You know, what does it actually look like? What are the issues in trying to develop that in individuals over time?
What are the critical skills that students need to understand and which can only be learned through real-world application?
Just being out there and doing it. You know, there's been studies done on students that have done real-world learning versus those that do text-based learning, and they found that students that get out there and actually do it are 2 to 3 times more successful in their long-term careers than those that do textbook-based learning. And the reason for that is because if you only learn things in terms of a textbook, you're never going to get your arms around the nuances. You're never going to develop a real critical set of thinking skills, thinking about, okay, maybe that works in this situation, maybe it doesn't work so well in this situation, or really questioning the underpinnings of a theory. Even if you watch a video about a leader or an organization, you're still not going to get the same sense of it. And so in that regard, I think that's why this is so important, just getting out there and doing it.
What critical role do you see the community-based organizations such as nonprofits and for-profits playing in the reduction of this transferability gap in higher education?
So one of the major trends that we see happening with many organizations right now is really this push toward corporate social responsibility and sustainability issues and practices. And that's really coming largely because what we're seeing is that we're seeing this push from like a really industrial model toward more of a human-centric model. consumers, employees want to see how their organizations are benefiting society, not exploiting resources, right? They want to see how they're growing the pie, so to speak, not kind of taking the pie. How are they benefiting individuals, communities, other organizations? And we can see that just in the general trend. If you go shopping, people will ask, well, is this sustainably farmed? How are you giving back to the community? In what ways are you reinvesting? And I think that really challenges the old industrial model where we have to exploit, we have to kind of abuse, we have to pollute our environment toward, well, how do we build more of a collaborative environment in which everybody benefits? How does it create a win-win? And so part of really understanding what that looks like in terms of as a future leader of an organization is really getting out there and dealing firsthand with the socioeconomic issues. Getting out there, working for a community-based organization, whether it be a for-profit or nonprofit, really addresses, kind of confronts you with the everyday challenges, resource constraints, how to think creatively and provide a new opportunity. How do you integrate that with kind of, management approaches that have been done in for-profit organizations, how you do it with nonprofit organizations, and then also vice versa. And so that really gets you out there and broadens your frame. And it also becomes a marketable tool for a student, because students can go out there and say, hey, listen, I've done, X, Y, and Z, as opposed to not just getting an A in a class, I'm actually able to show what I've done for the community. And one of the major issues is that transferability gap and trying to bridge that gap so that people can combine those experiences successfully together.
What do you believe will need to change over the long term to bridge this gap of colleges, departments, classrooms, and community?
I think a lot needs to change. So I think that we're already seeing the change here. I mean, the change has already started in the sense that you have millennials. A lot of students can't find a good job, or the type of job that they wanted, and they're a lot in debt. Sometimes hundreds of thousands in debt. I think the average debt is something like $33,000. But if you look more broadly, it's like $1.2 trillion, okay, in terms of national debt related to student loan debt. You also, at the same time, have companies like Google that are now saying that you don't even need to have a college degree to get hired. And then you have folks like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates who say, well, look at me, I didn't even have to get a Harvard degree, and I'm making $1 billion. And so this is like all converging into a perfect storm where increasingly the credibility of these programs are being questioned. And so just some examples of what we're seeing right now, and this is not just in the business school, but in the law school, for example, law school enrollments have dropped by 50%, 50% nationally just this past year. And that has really created a crisis in law schools because they're not finding enough students, and that's because law school students are not able to find jobs. There's also been decreases in terms of business school enrollments, largely because of that issue, because people are saying, well, if I have to spend this amount of money, where's the proof? I mean, no, if a student is very, very smart, they're not going to enroll in a program that, results in zero job placement. No person would do that. So I think that it's really coming to a head right now where people really have to show results. And so that's where I see the future headed. How are you showing that you're bridging this gap? How are you showing that whatever you teach in the classroom is relevant, that will get me a good job, that will help me develop my career and build new organizations?
And what might be some projects that you might explore with students to bridge this gap in real-world application?
Okay, so some projects, for example, might be building a website that helps people connect to their communities. Another project would be looking at maybe folks who are older demographics. Usually what happens is as people age, people kind of view them as useless, right? So they say, well, they're more of a cost than a benefit. So looking at how to reintegrate them back into the workforce is another project. Maybe working for public schools, seeing how we can transition this model even earlier into education. One major issue, for example, is financial literacy education that is not taught actually in public schools more formally. It depends on the state, depends on the local region, but it's not a mandatory requirement. And one of the major issues that we see in terms of just long-term success is that you're able to, the ability for you to realize your opportunities is based on your financial situation. You can be smart, you can be a genius, you can be brilliant, but if you don't have the money to do it, nothing's going to get you there. So there's a different set of skills with financial literacy that's not just contained in a math classroom. It's different conceptually, looking at how to integrate that. Other opportunities, in terms of, aside from that kind of education-related focus, looking at doing a turnaround strategy for a failing organization. So I've done that in the past where I've had students actually work for a for-profit that was failing and looking at creating a turnaround strategy. In nonprofits, I've had them do board development. How would they recruit? How would they create the vision, the branding strategy for a nonprofit? So there's a variety of different projects that can tap into these skills and make them very real world.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Professor Jackson.